So let's go. That's going to be my nice intro consistently. All right. Okay, we'll start with, are there any hot topics of the day that you feel like really strongly about, that you're really fascinated in? Any controversies or something like that?
Yeah, well, it's not really so much a controversy, but recently in Panama City Beach, I don't know if you were here like last weekend or anything, or when this episode is going to go live, but there was a bunch of people that came down that appeared to be spring breakers at first, and then it turned out to be this big.
Is that the Walmart
like,
looting
sort of thing? It was like some, I don't know all the details about it, so I want to be careful about like misinformation or anything. But there was a lot of guns. There was like some drive-by shootings. There was a lot of like, I don't know if it was full-on like rioting or what the details were, but I know that law enforcement was there and they confiscated like 70-something. Assault rifles and
70-something assault rifles on spring break.
Yeah, and arrested way more than that in numbers of people and stuff. And they had to close down a big part of Front Beach Road, and it was wild. And like that happened Sunday afternoon, and like earlier in Sunday, like right after my wife and I got out of church, her and my brother-in-law, we went to the beach, and then we left the beach, and then like got home, and then they were talking about all this stuff was happening. Like we had just left that exact.
Have you guys lived here like your whole lives? Or
yeah, I lived here my whole life.
Have you ever seen any other crazy spring break things happen? Because I imagine there's got to be some stories.
But spring break in Panama City Beach in the past was really bad. And then I don't forget exactly when it was, but maybe 15 years ago.
When you say really bad, would someone from like a Sin City call it really good? Was it? Does it become Sodom and Gomorrah?
Well, it's like, it got to, at certain parts, like at its worst, it's like thousands and thousands of people on the beach where you had an aerial view of the beach. You couldn't see it, the sand, because of all the people. Mm-hmm. And, violent activity, sexual violent activity happening, excessive drinking to the point of like, people are, are passing out on the beach and then getting like trampled over and like overheating because they're dehydrated and lots of
spring break.
Yeah, it was really bad. And then Panama City Beach got this, this word of like, okay, well, this is the party capital of the freaking world. We're gonna, we're gonna go here. Even to the point where now all that's done, it's still, if I talk with somebody from out of town who's never been to Panama City Beach, or they've been once or twice when they were younger or something, they're like, oh wow, Panama City Beach, like that place is pretty. It's pretty wild, but I'm really proud of our city because the name of Panama City Beach is starting to really improve because, like I said, since 10, 15 years ago or whenever it was, they changed some of the laws with how alcohol can work on the beach and those sorts of things, and has slowly made it more of a family-friendly place, which is exactly what we, like as a citizen here, like we want it to be a family-friendly, place. Because like economically, some people say it's like, okay, well, the spring breakers, they bring a lot of money. But honestly, families bring way more money. Like a family of 4 brings way more money than 4 spring breakers, and they cause less trouble than 4 spring breakers.
Yeah.
So that's really what we want our.
Because what I heard last week when I was talking to a security guard at this little club I went to the other day, and he was like, "Yeah, man, you gotta be safe." There was a Walmart riot the other day. I assume it was connected to what you were talking about.
They had to close down the Walmart.
Yeah, apparently there were like guys in pickup trucks, and they were like distracting the police at gas stations. They would go and like pump up music and have little parties in the gas station. So the cops would go there like, all right, guys, you need to. And while they're doing that, there were huge amounts of people that just broke into a Walmart and started looting the ever-loving bejesus out of it.
Yeah.
And then that same week, a guy said there was a drive-by shooting with an assault rifle, which is, not the very family-friendly picture I imagine the locals want to see. Oh, goddamn, bro.
If you forgive me one second.
Gotcha. So I guess that is the tension, the conflict of interest that I guess a mayor or some politician of the area has to work through. How much money would our place be winning or losing if we start to cater more towards the locals who live here or the people who pass by just to pump us up, give us some money?
Yeah. I mean, like Panama City Beach is like very much known for tourism. And we get a lot of, a lot of our funding, our city, our economics and stuff. A lot of the ways are built off people traveling to the beach, and like most everybody really likes that, and like that's good. But we still want it to be a safe and good, place. And the really good thing is our mayor of Panama City Beach, Mark Sheldon, is a phenomenal human being. Like he really, really cares about this town. Like he knows what he's doing. Like pretty universally, like everybody, really likes him. Like I've met him in person, and he's really, really stand-up guy.
That's
so, like,
beautiful to hear.
He's like moving us even closer towards being, known as a very family-friendly, nice place for families to go.
Now you bring up politics, and we'll go in this as far as you want to, because I understand this is a very hot topic, and there could be some consequences people don't want to get into by talking about these sorts of things, but it seems important to speak about politics. How has that affected your life over the past few years, especially through the Trump and Biden presidency, where I feel like it's been more heated and there's been more tension surrounding politics than there's been in America in a long, long time, at least from what I've heard from people who've lived here for a long, long time.
I think the net good that has happened over the last, say 8 years, sort of time frame, is that younger people are now caring about how the world works, which I think is really good. Like,
it's one of the main reasons they started this.
Yeah. I mean, whenever I was going through high school, like, I didn't care about politics. I would know who the president was, but I didn't know anything else.
Ditto.
I wouldn't know why people are, frustrated at the guy or what happened or, what have you. The negative side, obviously, is then all the controversy that happens and people convoluting political beliefs with character value. And seeing, like, the inability for a lot of people to be able to sit across the table from somebody and have a discussion or even have a friendship with somebody who believes politically differently than they do. And for it to unfortunately get to a place where it's like as binary as some people see it. It's like, well, if you like this guy, I don't like you. If you like this guy, then we can be friends. And that's not how it should work.
Agreed. I was listening to a conversation between Ben Shapiro and Bill Maher the other day, and he brought up the same exact point that you just said, that a lot of people you lose rationality in a conversation, or at least this was his point, when you start to equate your political beliefs and the ideas you currently support as your character. Like, whether or not you're a good person depends on whether you believe this, that, and the other. And it really makes me wonder, one, like, how the hell did we get here? Because if you detach yourself emotionally from it for a second and you just analyze it rationally, it becomes really obvious that, okay, you're not going to find truth, or at least it seems to me you're less likely to find truth if you focus... If any criticism or question of the beliefs you currently hold gets shot down, like you become an evil person, a Nazi, immediately just for questioning these beliefs or holding an opposing belief.
Somebody says something that is maybe contrary to your belief system and how this particular political matter, should or shouldn't happen, or social matter or whatever. If they criticize the idea and then you become personally offended, I think it's the tying your own identity to the way something should work or shouldn't work, or the way this particular event happened, or whatever this controversy is where it starts to get dangerous. Like, I'm a God believer. Like, we're talking about Bible college and stuff that I went through. Like, my belief is that my identity was formed by my Creator, and I believe God is my Creator. My identity is not tied to whether or not I voted for Trump or I voted for Biden. It's not tied to whether or not I think that the mayor is a good guy or a not good guy. It's not tied to any of that stuff. And I think even if you're not a believer and you think that the Bible is a bunch of baloney, it's still really, really good to not tie your identity to the way you think. Because the way you think now is very, very differently than how you thought when you were a child. Or hopefully. How you thought, hopefully. Or how you thought 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 minutes ago. Somebody presents new information and you're like, actually, I was wrong. That doesn't mean your identity was wrong. That doesn't mean that you're suddenly a bad person because you used to think this way and now you're kind of enlightened and you're like, actually, no, this thing makes more sense to me. Like, that part doesn't
Yeah, right?
change.
There's a great quote, as the facts change, my beliefs and my opinions change. Like, I don't know what you do when you find out you were wrong about a certain thing, but to identify with truth as opposed to identifying with like a more rigid idea, whether, like you said, whether Biden or Trump is a good president, and then this is fact, solid, irreversible. It seems so helpful if you replace that identity with, I just want to associate with what's true and what's good, and then to be humble enough to recognize that we are incredibly ignorant about a million different topics. Most topics that there are to be experts on, most topics in the world that you could be an expert on, I'm not an expert on. I'm an expert on essentially no topics in the world. So to have these super strong beliefs, man, it's almost, and this is maybe putting my tinfoil hat on for a second, but it's almost as if people are being hypnotized. Because I don't know if you've ever had those conversations with someone about politics, or you've kind of heard it peripherally, where it seems like someone becomes possessed like by this puppeteer, and they just start getting enraged, and they'll just throw out these talking points.
I think that's the identity thing, because they're like, if I've got this idea and you're bringing up facts, you're bringing up statistics, you're bringing up whatever that's against this idea that I have.
Error.
Yeah. Then if my identity is tied to that, I don't want me as a person to be wrong. I don't mean I have a wrong opinion or something. It's like, I don't want my spirit, myself, my personality, my existence to be wrong. Obviously, no one wants that. So if you convolute your identity with the idea that you hold, or the opinion you have of a particular event that happened, and someone shatters that, well, if your identity is tied to that and this is shattered, then you're shattered too.
This makes me wonder.
It shouldn't be like that.
So, okay, I don't know if you ever watched the QAnon documentary on HBO. I heard a lot about it, never watched it myself, but from the people who did watch it, were speaking about it, they described that a lot of the people in this documentary, they seemed like they were hungry for a tribe. They were hungry for a purpose, and that they were willing to overlook a lot of red flags because they so deeply yearn to be a part of a tribe and to feel like their life is meaningful. Like, you're really on this movie-esque mission where there's this secret agent that's anonymous giving you these facts, and it's like, okay, I'm interpreting the truth.
Yeah.
I can see behind the curtains, right? And not that everyone nowadays who believes strongly in a political party is QAnon believer. That's not what I'm saying. But it makes me wonder whether or not there's this community-shaped hole in people's lives that makes them more susceptible to wrapping your entire identity around a political belief, wrapping who you are so tightly around, because when you talk about the tension between Democrats and Republicans right now, it's really become very tribal, right? Like, this is my team. This is who I have to support. Like, no matter what, you don't side with the other guy. You side with your team, your brothers. This is your brotherhood.
And if somebody from your side does something stupid, it's like, well, no. Like, that's not, we don't talk about that because my side is right.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, overall, you might agree with some things, but it doesn't mean that this particular aspect of it is right. It's wrong. If it's wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah, right. Like, no, this is my team. Man, have you ever seen people get really tribal when it comes to sports?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can get pretty wild. I've never really been a big sports guy.
Ditto.
So I've never really been into it. I mean, I've watched football games, and loved it, but I've never been like, rallying like really strongly behind
the face paint, the like yelling.
But I mean, that's like, I respect it. Like, if that's, if you enjoy it and it's, and it's fun, you like being a part of it, then,
if you can draw like a sensible line between, supporting my team and doing something ridiculous like getting into fights with opposing teams.
Yeah.
Because that is a common story. Yeah, man. This tribal power. Do you feel like you're part of a strong community?
Yes. So I've had an interesting relationship with community over the last few years. So I was born and raised in Panama City. And then whenever my wife and I, in 2019, we moved over to Gainesville, Florida. And moving from Panama City, Florida to Gainesville, Florida was a really interesting experience for me because I had only ever lived in Panama City before, which meant I had my comfort bubble, I had my community, I had my friends, I had my mentors, I had all these people that I was used to being around. So whenever I moved to Gainesville, Florida, I had to learn how to rebuild community. Like, I didn't have any friends that lived in Gainesville. Like, we moved over there having, we knew like 2 people, and that was it. One big part of it was we got plugged into a church over there that we really, really loved, and that gave us a huge sense of community, got to meet some more people. I ended up getting a job with a company that I really, really loved, and I was talking to the owner of the company like this morning. Like, we're still like super, super close friends. So I got the sense of, of community from my work, which I was really thankful for, and from my church, which I was really thankful for, because not everybody gets great community at their work. Sometimes it's not a job you like or something.
Yeah, fair enough. But man, when you talk about that church community, I went through a period of my life. I was raised Christian, and around high school time of my life, I became very skeptical and almost religion bashing. I became completely on the other side. And as a side tangent for a second, I feel like when people identify as atheists, very often they are stuck with this stereotype of being the religion bashing atheist. You know what I mean? And I don't think that's what all atheism is, but that's where I fell at that point in my life. And I've started to sort of reintegrate it into my life as of late. Many different religions, seeing the utility and the good that can be found in it. And the community I felt when I go to a church. There are a few places where I felt strangers become family in a snap. Church has definitely been one of those places. As a funny side note, jiu-jitsu gyms, I don't know if you know what that is. It's a martial arts gym.
Yeah.
Yeah, really any of them that I go to, it's like the most respectful, kind, humble people that are trying to like choke you out and break your arms. It's very strange.
No, I've heard, because Joe Rogan's jiu-jitsu, right? Is that his form of martial arts?
That's one of his.
One of his, yeah. Now, I remember I've heard him speak about the culture.
Yeah,
and
man.
it just being a really, positive, like it's about like building each other up.
Yeah, hell yeah.
That's really cool.
There's really no Cobra Kai that I found it.
Man, that show is so cringy. Oh
I never watched it. I've seen a little bit of it as my friends have watched it, but when I talk about it, thankfully, I get to only refer to the Karate Kid, the original movies.
Yeah, no, the original Karate Kid, seen it a million times, seen it with my dad a bunch.
That's
Solid.
gold.
That is gold. The show is.
I like your politically correct shift.
Just a bunch of like insecure dads trying to get their kids to solve their problems that they wish they would have resolved in high school.
Oh my God, dude, that's so funny you say that. One of the jiu-jitsu legend, Hickson Gracie, was talking about introducing kids to jiu-jitsu, and he said one of the biggest things parents tend to do is to try to fulfill their unfulfilled dreams through their kid. So they'll push them way too hard. The kid will end up like hating jiu-jitsu, but they'll become this tyrant. He's like, no, don't do that. Yeah. Make it very playful. Let them really enjoy So anyway, circling back to community, it made me recognize that there are a few places where I've really found such a tight-knit, open, honest, trusting group of people than when I've been in church or when I've been in a martial arts gym. And man, when I'm there, it feels like there's a part of me that hungers for it.
Yeah, it's because you're part of the body.
Yeah.
You're part of this group of people. You are wanted and you want others. You are needed and you need others. Like, I mean, this goes back to my belief system, but like we were made, or at least I believe that we were made to be with other people. We were not made to live our lives alone. There's
most definitely
that that backs it up too.
And it's funny that you say the scripture.
Everyone across the board, even if you're not a believer, everyone desires community. Even if you're like super introverted, you still have your people. And if you don't have your people, you really want to have those people because that's how we're made.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I'm pretty introverted myself, which doesn't seem like it.
Doesn't really add up. Yeah, you're a closet introvert. No one would know.
Right? Trust me, there's a lot of hours spent by myself, charging myself up, kind of building my hunger, so that when I come for the podcast, it's like, okay, I was fasting for a while, fasting from human interaction.
If you're hanging out with me, you're gonna need like 3-4 days of solidarity.
Afterward. Nice. Yeah, you seem like you're really energized by speaking with people.
I'm like extremely extroverted, and like my wife and I have talked. We'll go back on the community thing in a second. My wife and I have talked a lot about buying an RV and living out of an RV. Or at one point we considered living out of it full time. Now we're kind of more so thinking of it as getting an RV so we can go on like month-long trips and that sort of thing. It's definitely part of our it's on my vision board in my office. It's like part of everything.
Hell yeah, man! Where do you want to go?
But yeah, it's like figuring out that stuff. But the one thing that I've always kind of been a little sketched out is like it's like just my wife and I. It's like we will really really enjoy having that time together. But it's like where are we going to go to church? Where are we going to go and see other people and have friendships and that sort of stuff. So that's the challenging part because I so much crave being around people.
Do you feel like you're better with a group of people? How do I say this? Are you good at making friends with people from scratch? Like from going from 0 to 100 really quick. Like I didn't know you.
Yeah. I mean, I've known you for all of like.
Fair enough. Oh yeah. As soon as I walked into the place we met, it was almost like you were talking to me immediately, and it's a very fun flowing.
Yeah. I love meeting people. Figuring out like, okay, like what's our common ground? What are maybe some shared interests that we have? and then learning as much as I can about that person.
Oh, dude, I think you'd be great on the road. There are so many churches in America as I'm
that
finding.
part would be exciting, like going to a new church every single Sunday and just like interacting and meeting with people.
Yeah, I've seen very interesting variety. Okay, so when I grew up, I was maybe in the older stereotype church where the priest comes out with the very decorated robes on. It's much more the whole, like the old hymns speaking, I don't know, like a Roman dialect, something like that.
Yeah, like more like traditional sort of.
Yes, but as I've come down south, I went to one church called the Church of 1122. And this was like a fucking stadium. this was a few thousand people that you go in for free, and they were like Christian rock bands. And then I went to another church by a college campus, and it was much smaller, but it was almost like a hipster church. It's hard to describe.
That's funny.
Yeah. There was like cool lighting, like and the crowd was incredibly young, and the pastor was talking in very young terminology, talking a lot about like college struggles. So there's a lot of variety to churches as you go through America. But I think you'd have a blast, especially in the church realm. But hey, if you think you can handle a month of just being in a close quarters with really anybody and not becoming like rats tearing each other apart, then that for me, that would be the struggle. But if you got it, man, more power to you. Yeah. But where would you want to go?
Dude, it's my number one place that I want to go to. And I've had this realization for the last few years after watching a YouTube series. So I follow a YouTube series called Keep Your Daydream on YouTube. And they're a family of RV people. Like they just live out of their RV, full time. They're super, super cool, super interesting family. And they went to New Zealand. And that is my place that I want to go.
How the hell do you get an RV to New Zealand?
Bad. Yeah, well, you can ship your RV. That's like ridiculously expensive probably, but most people go there and rent an RV.
Gotcha.
If you want to do the RV thing. So what I want to do is go to New Zealand, stay there for a month, and rent a C-class RV, which is like a large, like the kind of large van, the more like traditional sort of looking.
Yeah, my dad's huge in a van, so he's told me.
And rent one of those. And be able to just drive up and down the coast. Like I've got a friend of mine that I've known for years that lives in New Zealand. So I love to stop by his place and just go up and down the coast. Like I'm a big Lord of the Rings. I'm super like nerd Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. That's my jam. So being able to go where the Hobbit, or the what's the place? Or the Shire.
Yes. Yeah, wait, that was made in New Zealand?
Yeah, it was almost all of Lord of the Rings was shot in New Zealand. So like the actual set is like, it wasn't on a stage, like it's actual, like the Hobbit holes are like just there, like right now. And you can go and like tour it and
God, dude, to blast like Lord of the Rings background music as you cruise through the country, just rolling hills as far as the eye can see. Yeah, sounds like a little slice of heaven.
When I'm here working, I'll just have Lord of the Rings like on a soundtrack. It's kind of playing in the background. It's just super chill, man.
Yes. Oh my God.
Lo-fi before lo-fi was cool.
Dude, I'm beginning to introduce background music more and more into my life. I was hanging out with a friend a little while ago, and he really put me on to the beauty of ambiance. Like he turned blacked out the windows, put on unique lighting, then started blasting like Lord of the Rings music, and he kind of turned to me with this like epic look in his eye and started talking in this deep voice, and I'm like, I'm getting pulled into this. I don't know, you're a mage, you're a wizard, bro. Okay, so circling back to Community for a second. I forget what the hell we were.
I think we were talking about like just Community and how how different people attract.
Oh wait, before we do that, I do want to stick on Lord of the Rings. If you could, which of those characters would you most want to be like?
Oh man! All right, so I have
and not talking about their powers or anything, like their character.
No. Since the beginning, Aragorn has been my guy. Like he. Like a lot of his character traits, his best character traits, emulate the kind of person that I want to be, which is the kind of person who is a leader, who's strong, who is always going to be, when there's the line of people and we're all going somewhere, Aragorn is always right at the front. Like whenever, he's got his whole army behind him and he says, okay, we're going to go. And that scene, I think it's in Return of the King, where then, Mordor is behind him and there's that, like, we have to fight and distract the army for Frodo. And that whole scene. I got some chills too. I'm there too. My favorite part about that scene, he's got the cool speech, he's got all those things, but he says charge or whatever he says, for Frodo, and then he starts running before the rest of the army starts running. Like he's the one going forward. He's not sitting up on the throne telling his armies to go fight. He's right there.
That's such a common theme you see in movies nowadays. And I don't know if it's a more recent thing or that's been true across stories for thousands of years, but where the villain will be like, did you see the Avengers Infinity War?
All of them, yeah.
Okay, so you know when they're having the last big battle and all the people came back who were dead and Thanos has his army and the armies are clashing and Captain America was leading the charge. Captain America and Black Panther, they were both like sprinting in the front,
man.
and then you see Thanos and he's like pointing and all his warriors like run past him. The difference between a boss and a leader, the tyrant and the good king. Man, okay, so for you, and I feel like we're tapping on it a little bit as we talk about Aragorn, but the best qualities of a leader. Yeah, what would you describe are like the key qualities of a leader, or maybe just a good person in general?
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can have in a leader is servant leadership. Caring more about the person you're leading and caring more about the outcomes in their life than you do about whatever the current job or mission or thing is. And I've seen that manifest inside of my, my company and, my employee. I've seen it manifest itself inside of, church leadership and having a team of volunteers and, and that sort of thing. I'm a very active member of the Panama City Beach Chamber of Commerce. So I meet business owners all day, every day. And this consistent thing across the board for the larger companies around the Panama City Beach area and Bay County area is if they have a large company, they are a good leader. Like they care about. So I heard a story last night. I was at an event called Idea Camp. It was put on by the chamber, and one of the business owners is a guy named Jimmy who owns an air conditioning company. And what he did, Jimmy Thorpe, if you're watching this, I love you, man. What he did is he decided to hire a leadership coach, not to teach him to be a better leader, which that was an aspect of it, but he hired this leadership coach for his team. And it was something that they, had the option of partaking in. They didn't pay any money for it or anything. But the sole reason he did it was so that his team just became better people. So they would know better how to interact with their family, with their friends. And he just invests in his team, knowing that they very well could take this training and go and leave and, go elsewhere. But he invested a good amount of money just to invest in his people. It's one thing to have like an employee appreciation day and like order some pizzas and have everybody hang out, after work. It's a whole other thing to spend thousands of dollars and get coaching, give them like
lasting tools for their life,
for your people. Yeah, like caring more about your people that you're leading than you do for your own outcomes or your own sets of goals that you have.
That's something. So we met at this communication. Seminar is probably not the right word.
It's like a lunch and learn. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the big tips for communication that they gave was kind of what you're talking about when it comes to serve the other person before serving yourself. And that's something that I struggle with truly believing in. And by that, I mean, like when we're talking right now, one of the huge goals in my communication is enjoy the podcast, enjoy our conversation right now. I feel like I'm having a good conversation. And that in a way is selfish, right? Because that is perhaps the primary goal, have an enjoyable conversation with you. But fascinatingly enough, my selfish goal also, it seems to me, coincides with your well-being. So it's not as though my selfishness is to your detriment. It's like a mutualism, right? We're both being boosted up. And I'm not, to be honest, I'm not prioritizing your good outcome over my own. And that's a tough thing to say because while we're talking, I am very focused on you, making sure we're having a good conversation. I'm not offending you, disrespecting you, doing things that you would find regrettable in the future. But it's strange to really wrap my head around what that means, this servant leadership or servant communication, because there is a lot of useful selfishness, I think. And I don't know if that gets talked about enough because so often I feel like people combine selfishness with badness. Like when you're selfish, you're immediately screwing over other people to get to the top of the heap. Like I feel like that's a lot of the image people have in their heads when they're selfish, when they think of selfishness.
I think that's definitely a big aspect of selfishness is the imagery of if you're selfish, it's you're sending other people out to do things for you. They're fighting the battle and you don't really care if they, it's kind of like Thanos. He has no regard of his army, and if his army perishes in the fight, he just cares about the fight. That's him being, selfish. But I would argue that with the right leader, going back to those leader attributes, if you genuinely care about your team, immensely. Then what's going to happen is if your goal is to care about them, then you'll go and invest in the training and you'll do all those things and you'll care about their outcome more because that's what fuels you. If you're a really, really good leader, then caring for your people is what is most important to you.
And that's
then that fuels you. So it's like, yeah, it's selfish as hell. But it's also like the more selfish you are, the better it is for other people. Because at the end of the day, what you really care about is other people.
Yeah, that's an interesting loop.
Yeah, it's a loop depending on your perspective and your true motives. Like for you right now, like your end all be all goal for being here right now, I would guess, is to end up having a really, really good podcast. And if you really care about me as a guest, you're going to do every single thing you can to make sure that I feel comfortable, make sure I feel good, and lead me in the direction of the podcast and make sure we're staying on whatever sort of topic you're wanting to stay on, stay in that direction, staying within the time parameters that you want. And if I'm having a great time, I'm going to be able to help that'll happen.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So it's this sort of alignment between, I feel like when people say care about the others or be selfless, what they really mean is maybe be selfish in a morally straight way. Like if I was selfish right now in a way that, never mind, because I feel like I'll just be repeating what we were already talking about. Because if I was selfish in a way that screwed you over, well then, okay, that's the bad sort of selfishness. Now you're regretting the conversation. You wish we never had it.
But I think what it does is like you reveal your true motives by how you operate. So if you're crossing the street and there's this sweet old lady and she trips and falls, has no ability to get up on her own, and it's in your best interest because you're trying to get to where you need to go because you're late for a meeting or you need to get there on time. It's like, okay, a selfish person would just go to their meeting and leave the sweet old lady sitting there. But if you've got some goodness inside of you, and I believe everybody has plenty of goodness inside of them, they might mask it sometimes, but it's there, then what really fuels you is feeling good. Like what I want to do is feel good. And if the sweet old lady is sitting there, and obviously everyone's going to help the sweet old lady, but you pick up the sweet old lady, help her finish crossing the street, and get to your meeting on time, you're getting to your meeting late. Yeah, you're getting out to your meeting late, and that sucks, and like, okay, I wish I would have got to the meeting, but you netted so much good because helping the old lady brought you up here, and being late maybe brought you down here. Mm-hmm. But overall, like you netted super high because you still cared about yourself. It's like whenever you go to help somebody else, honestly, I don't think that you can help somebody else and then not also have the feel good part of it. So if what you're trying to do is be selfish and feel good, then helping people accomplishes that goal. But I don't know if that makes sense. That was a lot of roundabout.
No, I think I got it. But now that brings me to a question. Have you ever interacted with evil before? Have you ever seen it in your own life? Something you would define as evil?
I guess it depends on what you mean by evil. I mean,
however you define it.
That's an interesting question. I have certainly met people that I did not agree with and people that I thought were doing things that I thought, was an evil thing. I can't think of like a super specific one. That's a really good question. I don't know. What about you? Do you have a
evil
one where you have?
It's fun. I have examples popping in my head, but the person they relate to is kind of personal, so I'm trying to find a way to say it so I don't expose them in their own struggle. Evil.
Yeah, so be thinking about that. And I have something that just popped in my head is fundamentally, I don't think any one person is evil. I think the only thing that is evil is the devil. And the reason the devil's evil is because he is void of God. All the goodness in the world, I believe, is a straight direction from God. If someone is a non-believer, they don't think God is, in existence or anything that is good that they do, I think is evidence of the goodness that God placed in them whenever they were created. So no, I don't think that people are ever evil. But if you're in the darkness enough then you can do things or say things that are of evil. So it's like I saw this video once that was talking about darkness, and it was like, what is darkness? Darkness is evil inside of this story. And what it was is darkness isn't really even a thing. It's not, and it sounds super weird, but darkness borderline doesn't exist. Darkness is merely the absence of light. If light is completely removed, then you're left with darkness, but you can't add darkness to something. All you're doing is just removing the light, and I think that's how evil works, is you pull the goodness away, and then what is left over we perceive as being, an evil thing. But no, I don't think I've ever really encountered an evil person.
Mm-hmm. So an evil person, maybe I should say more an evil act. Do you ever see Scott Pilgrim versus the World?
Dude, I'm so sad that I have not seen that movie. It's on that list of I'm embarrassed to say I haven't seen it, Yeah, that movie and Saving Private Ryan, I'm embarrassed that I haven't seen those movies.
Saving Private Ryan, if I saw it, I don't remember, but I definitely have to because that's another legend.
Yeah.
But okay, so Scott Pilgrim, at the end of the movie, one of the evil, wait, do you care if I have a spoiler? Or would
no, you can go ahead and spoil it.
Sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So near the end of the movie, the girl that Scott's trying to get the whole time, he finds out that the last evil boyfriend that he has to fight several evil exes to get to her. And the last one, she goes back together with him. She starts dating this evil ex at the end, and he goes to fight him, and he finds out that, he's mind controlling her. He has a little chip in her brain. And I saw that as an abusive boyfriend, as the real life application is someone who can maybe brainwash or hypnotize a person in such a way that they kind of own them. And I'm now thinking of Pinocchio, right? And the villains in Pinocchio are people who oftentimes want to keep Pinocchio a puppet. They don't want him to be a real boy. And I was listening to this psychological interpretation of Pinocchio, which is a funny thing to say, but it was really fascinating, useful. Yeah,
I watch that stuff all the time.
Yeah, you ever hear of Jordan Peterson?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, he has a class where he breaks it down. It's
really. I need to check that out. I haven't seen that.
Oh yeah,
I watched a lot of his stuff. Yeah.
Oh, if you just look up Jordan Peterson, Pinocchio, or The Lion King, he does both those, and it's
really
yes.
It's funny you say that because in my head, I was just thinking about The Lion King, and I was like, oh yeah, I could talk about Scar.
Yes. Oh, okay. Here's the cool thing about Scar. You remember he cages the bird. I don't know if you remember. The bird is supposed to be the eye for the king.
Yeah.
The guy who looks around and tells him the state of the nation, right? He soars above.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Scar is the sort of king. So we're talking about the tyrant, the boss, and good leader earlier.
Yeah, yeah.
And they seem to be symbols, at least in some interpretations, of a good king and a bad king. And the bad king is the person who locks up the eyes. The person who doesn't want to see the problems, who doesn't want to see the truth, he will attack anyone if they bring bad news. Yeah.
It's just he locked up Zazu because he wants to lock up Zazu. I never thought that it was
the fucking lair.
Yeah, dude, that's sick. I love that.
Yeah, man. Oh my God. I highly recommend it. And if anybody else is interested in it, watch it.
That's cool.
Because it's a very interesting way to start watching movies when you recognize them as symbolic representations of real life. These stories try to take out the story of real life, the important parts of real life, and compact it into a few hours and teach you these incredible lessons that can apply through huge amounts of your life in just a few hours. And when you start to realize the layers, anybody who brought bad news to him, I'll swat him down. Mufasa's mom comes up to him and he's like, yo, we're gonna rebel. We have no food, people are dying. And that's another interesting thing, that when the tyrant rules, the people starve. The lands become barren. He burned the lands out. He just took all the food but didn't resupply them. He broke the cycle of life.
Yeah.
In a way. And that gets to a really interesting thought. How deeply is morality, how do I say this? How much of it is subjective, right? Just based on person to person. Some person likes chocolate, some person likes vanilla. That's morality. Or is it more of this God rule? There are these laws of nature that if you break, you'll kind of become a Sodom and Gomorrah. And that really makes me wonder, is America on that path right now? on that path of we're out of line with some value. Okay, and this will bring up an interesting question. Do you think there are any values we have at the moment as a country, things we promote as good that are actually bad? Things that we say like, you should get this, aim for this, want this. But if you actually want it and you actually try to get it, it's not worth it. Do you think there are any values like that?
I think most of the values that are in our country, whether they're more there's center values or right values or left values, there's good attributes to a lot of them. And then if taken to some weird extreme, then it becomes, bad. So I'll give two examples. Capitalism and that view of pursuing business and gaining, more wealth and that sort of thing, and like social justice, issues. If we have on the capitalism side, in its worst form, it ends up with one person being rich and everybody else being poor, and everybody is impoverished except for this elite upper people that have everything, and everyone else is in absolute poverty and doesn't have enough bread to feed their family.
Monopoly problem.
Yeah, that would be like the worst case. But on the good side of it, giving opportunity and freedom for anyone to make their own choices and for anyone to make their own way and be able to start a business, even if you didn't have any sort of college background, and being able to build a life that you want to live. Sometimes that life involves having a lot of money. Sometimes that life involves having less money, but having way, way more freedom, but having the choice of doing that. Whereas in other countries, you may not have that much choice, to do that. So that'd be the good side. And then with social justice issues, it's like, okay, well, on the really bad side of it, well, then you end up with, hate crimes, and you end up with, just making fun of people. You end up with just all this bad stuff. You end up with murder. You end up with all this stuff because it was under the lens of, well, we're doing this for this specific social good, but then you end up hurting all this other stuff. But on the good side, people who are not represented end up being represented, and people who are not cared for end up being cared for.
The game of balance, man.
It's a balance on both sides, which brings me to the point of, well, what is good? What is morality? How do you figure out what is good and what is not good? And the obvious solution to me is you go to who created everything, and that would be God. Like God established what is good and what is not good. Like He has a plan. He translates a lot of that plan to us, and there's a whole lot of it that we don't fully get.
So how would
all of us are on this journey of, whenever we're going through an action, whenever we're going through voting for somebody to be our next president, when we're going through, agreeing or disagreeing with the social justice issue that comes up, agreeing or disagreeing with capitalism and with, starting a business, and how much freedom should a business owner have, and how much freedom, should this person have, or whatever. It all has to go through the lens of figuring out, okay, well, how did God design this, and how can we all be as close in line with what God teaches in the Bible? And if we all can do that, that's, I think, where we find that perfect balance. I think that's the pursuit of every single person, is finding that balance and figuring out how to live their life in the way that God calls us to live our lives. And it's when we fall out of that is when we have really bad capitalism and when we have really bad, social justice.
So how do you think you can tell? Like, how do you think? What are some tools that God gives us to be able to tell when we're out of alignment, when we're off balance? What are some perhaps red flags that you would think of?
I think the core one is like, we were talking about, everybody like intrinsically has a need for community. I think the other aspect of it is finding your identity, like we were talking about before. And once you define your source as being God, and you step away from your source being the opinions of other people, I think is then when you get the freedom to see that goodness and the freedom to see that morality. And what I mean is, if you've got this group of 127 people, and this is your group, this could be your social, friend group, this could be your college campus, this could be, your business community or whatever. And if you tie your identity to whatever this herd agrees with, then you're not really doing what you want to do. You're doing whatever the herd is saying. So what happens if they're wrong? Like, what happens if it leads you down this, this wonky, path of, something crazy? Like, you have to have your source as something that is not just a random group of people. Like, I think that source needs to be God. And then inside of that is where you have, freedom and where you can learn what is good and bad. Because the other aspect of it, finding your identity, finding your source, is God gives us all his Spirit to be able to guide us. That's the whole point of why Jesus left the Holy Spirit behind whenever, he died and rose to heaven, is if you're a believer, you have the Holy Spirit to be able to guide you inside of those things. Like, that's part of why prayer exists. Like, we get the opportunity to pray to God and then get direction on what we should and what we should not, do. And then it's up to us to then interpret that to the best of our ability.
You talked about community earlier. It was interesting to hear that the Bible talks about people having this desire, this craving for community. Because when you look at psychology and neurology, they promote very much the same thing, that it becomes quite literally unhealthy. It starts to harm you. Your stress levels go up, more likely to be depressed, negative emotion. You'll feel more negative emotion, which can then make you more susceptible to diseases. Your immune system will become compromised. You can more likely to have Alzheimer's, memory loss, all these sorts of things, right? When you have a prolonged amount of time away from a community, you're just feeling bad. And this makes me wonder how much science and different types of religions align on certain ideas. And I'm wondering, for someone who doesn't believe in God as you see it, is there any way you think they could also become aligned with the good? Do you think there's any other way to align with the good aside from believing in Christianity?
I think exposing yourself to people who think differently than your immediate circle. What I mean by that is, by default, I think we all end up, the people in our circle, generally speaking, super generally speaking, end up being people that sort of kind of think about things in a similar manner, sort of kind of hang out in the same sort of places. Because if you met this, if you met this group of people at church, if you met them at a bar, if you met them at the beach, then you're probably going to continue to see them at the bar, at the church, or at beach, or wherever it was. I had a really impactful thing whenever I moved to Gainesville, Florida. Like I said, I lived there for a year and a half after being in Panama City the whole rest of my life. I'm 28. Is Panama City, I had my group of people. They were my constants, and some people filtered in and filtered out, but they were all fairly similar, people, because that's kind of what we do by default. Moving to Gainesville, I made a whole new set of friends. And from a political standpoint, the general synopsis of the political stance in Panama City is more red and more right. And then in Gainesville, it's more liberal, it's more, blue. That's just kind of the general, makeup. So I found myself in Gainesville with people who, generally speaking, thought politically differently than I did. So it's like, here in Panama City, it's like the default is, there's a pretty good amount of, conservatives. That's like, the default. But in Gainesville, it's like, well, if I run across somebody, chances are they probably disagree with me politically, which offers up an interesting thing when you're trying to make friends and build community.
Yeah.
And what was really cool and what I learned was that people that I didn't think I'd be able to get along with because they thought differently, I realized, like, no, we can actually build a pretty solid relationship. Even if they don't agree with me politically, even if they don't agree with me like religiously at all. Like, I've got a really good friend of mine who doesn't believe that God exists at all, and we're really good friends. So we find our our commonality. Obviously, like, I hope one day that he does find Christ. I hope he finds the Lord. But if he doesn't, like, that doesn't mean that I can't or don't have the ability or don't benefit from a friendship, because I still benefit from being friends with him. Every time I get to talk with him, because I get to learn from him and I get to see his perspective on things. So to answer your question, if not the Holy Spirit and God, how does one, find that sense of goodness? I think it's kind of doing some self checks, looking at other groups of people, seeing what other groups of people think about something, I think can then, enlighten you. Because if you think like the worst part of like a cult or something would be that everyone thinks the exact same way, and there's no differentiation of thought and opinion. Like that's like one of the worst things, other than if everybody gets murdered or something.
Kool-Aid.
Everybody drinks the Kool-Aid. That might be worse. But not being able to check yourself, because you could be wrong, and if everyone else around you, all of your friend group agrees or says that it's right, then you're like, well, it's probably right, and then you go on, doing something that you shouldn't.
This gives me an interesting thought about Hitler. I was listening. That's always a fun road to go down,
that's a
right?
great way to start a sentence.
So regarding Hitler, oh, by the way, is there any time you need to?
At 12:45.
12:45?
So 15 minutes, but I'm good.
All right. So fun Hitler conversation, nice lighthearted. So I was listening to someone who studied him to a good degree, Jordan Peterson. As you can tell, I'm quite a fan. I listen to other people too, don't worry.
No, I love me some Jordan Peterson.
Ditto. But that's also interesting to not get caught in the echo chamber.
Intelligent listener.
Yeah. Yeah. And he makes some beautiful points. So talking about Hitler, right? Imagine a man. How many people have to tell you that you're right, that you're special before you start to believe them, right? And this kind of gets to the point you were making earlier about everyone agreeing with you, right? Even if you're all wrong, the importance of not locking up Zazu, the importance of hearing these many different perspectives, because then it leaves you susceptible to having your worst demons sort of possess you. And the example they gave for Hitler was, okay, imagine you were in World War I, you were in the trenches, some of your best friends died. And then after all this fighting, this incredibly intense fighting, you thought you were on the right side fighting for Mother Germany. And then she betrays you in a way. She gives up. Now you're left there like, what the fuck? What were we all fighting and dying for? We gave up. I'm betrayed by my country. Not only that, now the rest of the world puts a lot of the financial burden on you and the blame on you and your country. So now your country goes into a depression, even worse than the Great Depression in America. So you're incredibly broke. He was homeless for a period. He tried to be an artist. That failed. And so you just have this spirit start to grow in you, this spirit of rage, this spirit of resentment, of disgust, of hatred. And you start to get involved in politics a little bit. You start giving these speeches. And you're really good at listening to the crowd. You're really good at watching the crowd and seeing what they like. And you kind of start to say more of that because maybe you're not super focused on doing what's good. Maybe you enjoy the high of the crowd. And maybe you really believe what these evil spirits are telling you, these spirits of resentment and envy. And then these people start to agree with you. They start to like roar their approval with things you have to say when it comes to blaming Jewish people, when it comes to building back up the might of Germany, all these sorts of things, all these ideas, and you don't go out of your way to listen to opposition or opposing views. And it really makes me wonder, if I was in his shoes, what would I have done? Is there anything I could have done to not go down that road? Mm-hmm. And the odds that I would have gone down the road he went down are upsettingly high. Mm-hmm. And it really shows the importance of having to talk to people who disagree with you and oppose you. But now this has me thinking about the evil spirits within us, right? And if you start to view a person as a collection of a bunch of sub-personalities, a bunch of mini-personalities, whether that can be lust, hunger, rage, happiness. You ever see Inside Out?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right? There's all those mini-personalities inside communicating and trying to figure out where to go.
Yeah.
And how to figure out when there is a vampire knocking at your door, right? The story of the vampire is you have to let it in, right? You have to let it in and make something with it. And I was listening to a story about Cain and the Cain and Abel. And when Cain went to God, God told him something to the effect of, these evil spirits laid at your door like a sexually aroused predator, and you let it in and allowed it to have its way with you. You let it in. You allowed it to. So it's implying there's some choice. There's some choice in bringing in these evil spirits, and then you make something with it. You created something with that spirit, which ended up, you killed your ideal. You killed your brother Abel, like the vision of this goodness. And I'm just stuck with this question of like how to not be a school shooter, how to not be a Hitler, how to know when the desires in you and the spirits in you are evil. And I guess I would go to you. Are there any ways you have of telling when a desire you have, even though it's a really tempting desire, because that's like that's the biggest part, right? That Nazism at the time, it was very tempting. It wasn't this Star Wars-esque join the dark side and it's this ugly wrinkled guy who's obviously evil. Like sometimes it's not so obvious that it's evil.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, how can you tell? How do you specifically in your own life tell when there is a temptation you have and it's really tempting and you're not really sure if it's bad or not, but you somehow stayed on the path of good? Are there any, that was a whole lot of roundabout to ask, are there any times in your life where that's happened to you, where you were able to stay on the path of good, or maybe you weren't? Maybe you did make something evil with this spirit and you stayed off the path, and if so, why?
So a super weird story pops in my head of a time where I had a temptation and I ended up like just totally going into it. And it's like at the time I didn't realize what it was bad, and then looking at it afterward, because the person that I had hurt had come to me and said, hey, you hurt me, help me understand this. So whenever my wife and I were dating, there's a time where we were hanging out with some friends of ours. My wife and I at the time had been dating for quite a while, and the other couple was like fairly a younger couple, like they hadn't been dating long. They're the same age as us. And I remember as we're like walking up and down the beach, there was a time when like I knew, because I had dated my wife for a long time, that she loved when we finished walking down the beach, if I like dusted off her feet and put her, just putting her sandals on, so she's not walking around with like sand in her feet. Like I knew she like loved that, because we've been dating for quite a while at the time. And then whenever I did that, the other girlfriend was like, "Babe, you never do that to me," And what I should have done is not like, play that up or something. But I was like, boyfriend, you gotta step up your game, man. Started doing some of that. It was like that sort of thing happened a few more times with that couple, in that day. And at the time I was just like, it made me feel good to feel like I was a really good boyfriend. Mm-hmm. But then what I realized afterward was like, no, like what I was doing was really downplaying my friend. And I was making him look bad. Like I wasn't sticking up for him. There's a million and one things I could have done better to, still make him, look good and not, make a scene of it, or anything. So I guess that would be an example. And second to that, just the overall question was like how to like basically stay on a good path, how to avoid, becoming Hitler if you were in Hitler's shoes.
That was definitely a piece of it, yeah.
The extreme version of it. That goes into kind of what my belief and what I was saying earlier of that no one is evil themselves. Like every great villain from a movie, they are all come from some circumstance. Like Scar, he comes from a circumstance. Like, yeah, you can look at him as like, well, yeah, he's evil. He's the bad guy, because what he wants to do is he killed his brother, and then he wanted to kill his nephew so that he could take over the world, his part of the savannah, and so that he could rule. And he brought in these evil hyenas and all this stuff. But if you really look at Scar's story from Lion King, what actually happened was he was the stronger brother, and he was younger, and he was downplayed because his older brother was the one who got to be king.
Well, when you say stronger, do you mean physically or mentally?
Yeah, well, physically. His well, actually, I'm making that comment because of comment that was in the movie. Maybe he wasn't actually physically strong. Maybe
physically, no, but mentally, yes. I think he was IQ higher.
Yeah,
but didn't have like the jock bod and all that jazz.
Yeah, so either way, maybe it wasn't physically, stronger, but he thought that he should be king, and he was downplayed, and his parent or his parents decided, because of how lions work, but Mufasa ended up being the king. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at the I think it's in the book, the Lion King book. I'm like a super nerd about this movie. I think that that Scar was not a nickname. I believe if you look at the book, like his actual name was a Swahili word that means scar, and it was like the name that his parents gave him. Mm-hmm. So it's like his parents literally named him Scar, and then he lives in his brother's shadow this entire time, and thinks that his brother thinks he's. So it's like this. His whole life is built around all I need, if I just became king.
And he's always comparing himself to his brother.
Constantly comparing himself. Like he always sees himself as less than with a desire of being more than.
Did you ever see the movie There Will Be Blood?
No.
Daniel Day-Lewis. It's this dark, heavy movie about this CEO of an oil company, but like back in the day where he was mining for it himself. And there's this one point where he gets really deep down into like the depths of his soul, and he tells himself, or he tells this person who he thinks is his brother at the time, that I want no one else to succeed. That for me, victory is in a sense stealing victory from everybody else. Like to crush everybody else. It's not that I want myself to succeed and, help rise others up as well. Like, no, I want no one else to succeed. And it's interesting because it's almost like that's the spirit that scars seem to have fed in a way, the spirit of envy, not the spirit, because there's a healthy degree of envy, kind of like what we were talking about with politics earlier, where, okay, let's say I'm in the fighting game, because then you kind of have to compare yourself to others because you're going to be going up against them in competition. And so maybe you take some things from their game, you build up, you start to strengthen yourself because you're comparing yourself to these other people. But then there's a way in which it becomes ugly, where you start cheating, maybe you start slipping poison into your opponent's drink or some shit like that. You know what I mean? And man, just how to know when you're taking it too far, going off the way. And maybe sometimes, like you said earlier with your friend, you didn't even know you were doing something bad until afterwards. Maybe sometimes you just have to fuck up, but be self-reflective enough to recognize you're fucking up so that you can make the change
after the fact. And so I think you're right about like the comparison thing. It's like not all the time comparison's not, bad. Because like other, video production companies, because I own a video production company myself, I want to see what they're doing, not so I can go like, woe is me, I'm never going to be as cool as them, I'm never going to have the gear that they have, I'm never going to have the abilities that they have, but so I can see, well, how are you doing it, and how did you get there, and is that the direction that I want to go, and if so, I need to do some of the stuff that you did, and if it's not, then maybe I need to do this part and avoid this thing because that brought you to where you want to be, but not where I'm going to be. But on the subject of defining, like, how are you going to like do a self-check of is this thing good or is this thing not? I think in the same way, if I were to find somebody who has the exact video production company model that I want, like to a T, I need to do every single thing I can to duplicate what they did.
Yeah,
so
right.
It's the exact same thing. If I did,
like, why didn't Cain just go up to Abel and ask him, like, bro, what are you doing exactly? Like, let me study you. Let me learn from you, master. As opposed to let me break you down so that, like, destroying my ideal. So maybe I don't feel the pain of looking at someone so much better or better than me.
Yeah. So like, if I want to be the best video production company and do everything that this person did, then that's a way to do it. But in life, we're not going to find the perfect person except Jesus. Like, he was the perfect person.
The ideal.
In every single step of the way. So if I'm going to be intelligent and follow a video production company that is where I want to be, I'm going to follow in their steps. Jesus being the only example of a perfect human being, if I want to be like him, I need to do the same sort of stuff that he did. So I need to figure out, well, what did he do? How did he live his life? And if I can try to do as much of the stuff that he did as possible, then I'm going to start to become the person that I want. And also, side note, he always knew exactly what was good and exactly what was not good. Like, he always knew the best decision to make.
And even he questioned God. That, like, right before he was being put on the cross or something, if I remember correctly, he doubted for just a moment, right? He doubted whether or not God's plan was good or whether God was good even. Like, how could you do this to your own son? And that's such an interesting addition to the story because he's the perfect person. He's the ideal. But even he, for a moment, had his doubts.
Yeah, I think that moment when Jesus is on the cross and he's asking God, I don't think that it was a time of him doubting, in God, doubting in the mission, but it was a moment where it revealed, God is man. Like, he did get hungry. Like, he did, if he got scratched, he did bleed because he was man and he was God, fully inside of, both of those rules. Because, like, Jesus would not have had the impact on the world in the time where he was physically walking around the world as he did. Imagine if he came down here and he came down here in in a chariot with a perfect body that couldn't get, he came down here with like a Captain America.
There's like nothing to relate to.
Sort of body that doesn't get hurt, doesn't need food, he wouldn't have been able to relate, which the whole point of Jesus coming down as a person was so that people could see him and feel him. He could tell those stories and have those,
what do you think? Okay,
moments.
just to...
Yeah, we need to wrap up.
12:44. Okay. What do you think of the idea that from devil to Jesus, that is the potential of man? What do you think about that?
That is the potential of man. What does that mean?
That everybody has the potential to be either the devil or Jesus. That inside of each individual, we can be either of those beings.
Like we can go in either of those directions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that we all have the choice over what we do and how we react to the situations that we're in. If you or I were placed in the exact same life circumstances as Hitler or the life circumstances as Scar, we can choose to go the path that is evil, or we can choose to go the path that is good. Oftentimes the good path at first seems like the more difficult path or even the impossible path, but ultimately we still have the choice. And there's scripture that backs up that God has a plan for us, and that He's not going to place something in front of us that we can't face without His help. I'm struggling to remember what it was, but the scripture says, like, I'm not going to place something in front of you that you're not going to be able to face without me. So like Hitler went the direction of being evil, but even Hitler and all of his life circumstances that led up to the time when he decided to start going down this path, if he had trusted in the Lord, if he had God on his side, then he could have had the strength to go the other direction and not become the Hitler that.
Well, I'd love to keep talking with you, man.
Yeah, we got to.
Thank you, Jayson. All right. Oh, yeah.
Good talk. Thanks so much for letting me have.
Ditto.
Sweet.
It was very fun. All right. Okay.
Cool, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was
I
fun.
enjoyed that.